Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tonight, I have the honor and privilege of being joined by my Shaykh and Murshid of the Fatimiyya Sufi order, Shaykh Wahid Azal, who returns for part 13. And in these series of dialogues and conversations, Shaykh has been blessing us with the wisdom and guidance that we need in these pivotal times that we're living in. So tonight for part 13, he's going to discuss about free will, predestination, and how those things come in terms of our own spiritual journey. I love my Sheikh dearly. He's my murshid, my guide, my friend. And without further ado, Nur alaikum to Sheikh Wahid Azal. Thank you so much for being back.
Bismillah and Nur alaikum and alaikum Nur to everybody. This is quite an involved philosophical topic, but it kind of came on as a result of one of the podcasts that you did with Matt Douglas, because people were asking me about this, what is our perspective on this question? And it is quite an involved question, but it's one that, needs to be answered, at least to some level of preliminary satisfaction. Because we're going to enter this subject from a somewhat metaphysical angle rather than a theological one, although the theological elements will be certainly present in what I'm about to talk about. But there is a hadith in the Shia corpus, and this hadith has been cited in numerous places and attributed to different amongst the infallibles. And the hadith runs as follows: one of the imams, sometimes it is the eighth imam, other times it is the seventh, other times it is the sixth, is asked what is the reality of the issue between predestination and free will. And the answer that the imam gives is la jab wa la tafwiz, but am bain al-amrayn. Neither predestination or free will, but the matter is between the two. And this basically places the issue in between two very interesting perspectives, because this issue was at the time, especially during the early centuries of when Muslim theology was being developed, and there were debates between the various schools, such as the Mu'tazila, who were ultra-rationalists, and then the Ash'arites were kind of, hyper-atomists, and some of their, antagonists back and forth, trying to make the various statements of the Quran and the Hadith gel together, whether, things are fated, completely scripted by the Almighty or not. If we, for example, fall into the fallacy of absolute predestination, then, obviously no actors, no such thing as moral agency. So that then no actor or no Muslim or no person can ever be blamed for any of their actions, because it has already been scripted by God. And so that then the whole of existence becomes nothing but a divine comedy. Yes. And so the reality of heaven and hell and all of these things kind of become, irrelevant issues. But then there's the issue of absolute free will. And this itself is also a fallacy, because to assert, as even, some atheists do, that human beings possess absolute free will, without even bringing the question of God into the equation, to possess absolute free will would be to posit that a single actor is in possession of every element of a chain of causality of all time. So it means that a person is an absolute actor, right? So in control of every element of causality around them and beyond them. And so that in effect makes that person a god. And this is the contradiction in the arguments of a lot of these people who are asserting this. So within the corpus of the teachings of the imams, peace be upon them, they, assert that the issue, the truth of the matter is somewhere in between. And within the commentary tradition of Islamic philosophy, and particularly from its Shia angle, this particular hadith became the focus of intense commentary. And one of the most interesting commentaries that we have on this is by the Shaykh al-Awhad, Shaykh Ahmad al-Ahsai, rahmatullah alayhi. He, in especially his first philosophical magnum opus by the name of Fawaid al-Hikmiyah, the hard fluxes of wisdom, that was the subject of the PhD dissertation of my friend Idris Samawi Hamid. He really unpacks this. And then in his other works, he revisits the issue and kind of comments on it from different angles. But the first place to start, we have to start from the ontology of the question. That means we have to start from the very question of being itself, as to what we mean by certain categories. And once we understand what these categories actually denote, then we're in a position to start to begin to grasp the question of what free will and predestination is talking about. The Sheikh al-Ohad, Sheikh Ahmed al-Ahsa'i, resolves a very important question in Islamic philosophy and also in the whole history of Aristotelian Neoplatonic philosophy, and that is on the question of what comes first. Are we dealing with the question of being primary, or are we dealing with the question of essence being primary? Mm-hmm. And this question had dogged, especially the Islamic philosophers from the time of Avicenna up to his own time. A lot of debates between, for example, the followers of Suhrawardi and the followers of Avicenna over this question. Suhrawardi asserted the primacy of essence or quiddity, mahia, over existence, taking existence to be an accident of essence. With Mullah Sadra in his school, this issue was completely reversed. Existence, wujud, became a primary category, and essence was this accident and emerged from it. The way that Sheikh Ahmed Ahsa'i resolves this question, he says that existence and essence, right, are two poles that are actually anterior to God. So that when we're speaking about the reality of God, we're talking beyond the categories of existence and essence. But what comes first, even though these two are in one sense equal, existence and essence, what comes first is actually existence, right? Being, wujud, emerges from the light of God, or the pre-eternal, or the primordial light of God. It comes out of it as the hidden treasure starts to become known. The light emanates, and this is existence. So that when we speak of light, we're also speaking of existence simultaneously. Now, Mullah Sadra had also asserted the same, but what Mullah Sadra had done is that he had equated the category of existence and light with God, whereas Sheikh Ahmed Ahsa'i says that no, actually they're anterior. They proceed from it. They don't precede it. And then from this then emerges essence, or ayn or mahiyya, depending on which terminology you want to use. And the way that the Shaykh puts it is very beautiful. He says that the nature of existence is to look upon its Lord, meaning the Godhead, whereas the nature of essence is to look upon itself and finds being or takween or existence. So this then becomes kind of the place to look at the question of free will and destination, wherein essence, in a sense, would stand for free will, and existence would stand for predestination or fate. So this is where we look at it. Now, the Godhead, Allah subhanahu, that which is beyond all categories that we can understand by the nature of divinity, since it is beyond all causes, but it is the initiator of all causes, right? In a sense, is both absent and present within its cause, but within its effect. So it initiates a cause. And in the language of theology and in the language of the Quran and scripture, we say that this is the eternal fiat of kun fayakun, be and it is and it becomes. This eternal fiat of be and it is, from the point of view of philosophy and metaphysics, is the realm of the command, the alam al-amr. And this is the place from which the existence and essence coalesce as a singularity that then produces the totality of existence as we know. In the language of the Bayan, this is the realm of the primal will, the first thing that has emerged from the pre-eternal essence of the Godhead. So this is the predetermination, right? That is acting. And as it moves down into the realms below, right? It imprints itself and its reality according to that level of being. Mm-hmm. By the time that we get to the level of our own world, the world of the malak mulk, or the nasut, the material world, right? There is the final imprintation, if you would, of not just the various realities that are reflecting on the divine world, since as all of the scriptures say that humans are created in the divine image. But one thing that it is imprinting among humanity that is a reflection of that image is the possibility of willing, right? So in a sense, human beings as the reflection, as the mirror, and as the image of God, right, are given this bounty to act, right, to decide, to act, to effect. Nevertheless, there's an issue here. Whereas human beings are created beings, God is uncreated. So God is beyond causes, whereas human beings are bound to causality. So a human being can only make a determination and make a decision and act on the world on the basis of already always causality that is going on at every instant, that is beyond them, that precedes them and antecedes them, whether we're talking about the past, the present, and future, right? So all of these things in time, the human being is bound to this, right? But at each moment within this greater constellation and trajectory of causes and effects, the human being can make a decision. But these decisions are bound to that network, that trajectory, that larger matrix of the causalities of cause and effect that already exists. So this is the element of the free will. And the element of the predestination is all of these nexuses, all of these tenuities, all of these connectivities, all of these things that connect a singular human being or a collective human being to the worlds beyond itself, right? So this is the meaning of what the imams are saying, that the matter is in between the two. And a human being can, for example, in a given situation, in a given trajectory of an event, make a determination or a choice that is put in front of it between A, B, C, D, and E, or sometimes just A and B. And that is its choice. But either one of those two choices are already moving within their own constellations of causalities of cause and effect. So that is the meaning of the amr bayna amrayn. Now, the question that has always emerged in the debates between the theologians is that, well, how does that not in itself then constitute a form of predestination? And the answer to this, and the answer that the imams give, is that it is and it isn't. And it is insofar as the causalities are already known by the All High before their cause and effect. And so is that the choices that a human being is going to make at the fructification of a particular cause and effect that encounters them. But nevertheless, the choosing at that moment, right, is a sort of reenactment of the divine fiat. So there's now a hermetic dictum, as above, so below. Yes. Just as God says be and it is, right, in pre-eternity, and without any cause preceding it, right? But with the human being, right, at a given point when it makes an action, it is sort of reenacting that cosmogenesis when God says be and it is, right? So it is its choice, even though that human being is bound to this network of causes and effects and all these sorts of things that it's ultimately bound to, right? And even though the All High at every moment knows the choices that are going to be made, whether it's going to be A or B or C or D or E or whatever. So that is the meaning of the amr bayna amrayn. The matter is between the two. Now, Ibn Arabi poses a fascinating kind of complement to what the Shaykh al-Asai is saying, and particularly in one passage of his Fusus al-Hikam, where he's discussing the ayana thabita, the immutable archetypal forms of all things. And he says that in pre-eternity, the ayana thabita, the immutable archetypal entities or the eternal platonic forms, have not whiffed from the taste of existence. This is the specific imagery that he uses in the Fusus al-Hikam. They have not whiffed, they have not even smelt the taste of existence. Which is sort of a paradoxical kind of, because he's using scent and taste as a simultaneous event. And neither one of these things occurs with these immutable archetypal entities. Yes. Because at that point in pre-eternity, they don't even exist. They are just merely phantoms, as it were, without existentiation and individuation in the mind of God. But once they move into the worlds, once they begin to concretize from these pre-eternal and primordial realms into the level of the Nasut, the material world, right? This concretization then produces the possibility, right, of bringing a mumtane, an impossibility, first into the realm of possibility of a mumkin, and then into a wajib, a necessary act, right? And these are the three forms in which we talk about in Islamic philosophy. We talk about the possibility of something existing. Now, necessary existence, wajib al-wujudiyya, is that category that is already always only applicable to God, because it is the existence that is necessary in itself. It has no need for any cause. There are no causes that precede it, right? Nothing is bound to it. Nothing binds it. It binds everything. Nothing encompasses. It encompasses everything, and so on and so forth as we move. But when it comes to the human being, once we are in this realm, it's sort of like an inverted image of God, as it were. In a good way, I mean that, rather than a bad way. right? This human being is sort of in a similar position as to what the Godhead, at least as an image, as a idea, occurs in its own primordial reality, right? So because that at that point with that human being, these ayana thabita, these immutable archetypal forms, like for example, the example that is always used in text of logic or in similar kind of texts is the form of horseness or horse. What is the ultimate archetype of a horse? The horseness of horse, right?
Yes.
The hoarseness of horse, even though it is not the human being that is bringing this about, but that archetype instantiates in its multitudinal forms throughout the ages, or even in a particular time within Nasut, right? So, and then the application of that hoarseness is brought to bear and brought to fruit and brought to application by the human being who rides it as a vehicle.
Yes.
Right? These examples can be multiplied. Now, how does this answer the question of free will and predestination? The way that the Shaykh Ahmed al-Ahsai now goes back to the question, he posits something that is quite interesting that I have thought about for many years. It's because it's a very unique resolution to this problem of fate. He says that a human being is free to the capacity as they move closer and closer and closer to the divine. So the further away that you are from the divine, the more unawake you are from the divine, the more you are bound to predetermined causalities that are occurring around you, by which you have really no idea are governing your life. But to the degree as you elevate up, the more that you elevate, the more you open yourself up, the deeper that you get into the nur, the more you have agency, because then you're participating in the divine agency and the divine freedom, as it were. So in a sense, human beings who seek their absolute freedom, right, need to elevate themselves more and more and more and more and more into the divine life. Once they do that, right, then their own freedom to act becomes that much more intense. Why? Because at that point they are then acting from the place of their own taqdir, from their own predetermined fate, as it were, from that immutable archetypal form of which they have been in the mind of God since pre-eternity, or what the Imams reference by the zarat, the existential particles of light, right, in the world of the existential particles. So, this is the reverse of what at least the logic of the West since the time of especially Kant, Immanuel Kant, has posited about action and human agency, and the conundrums that then, philosophical conundrums that then emerge from that, in then kind of putting the proverbial cart between the horse, before the horse, in blaming religion as the cause of human enslavement. Yes, church institutions, authoritarian political structures, they constrain human agency. No debate. There's 100% true. Empirical observation proves this. But there's a difference between institutions and the reality of God. Unless you want to, fall into another fallacy of shirk and say that the church or the mosque or the synagogue or institutions themselves are the embodiment of the divine, and then that becomes a real problem, theological problem from multiple angles. So when we are speaking about the reality of God and moving into that reality of God, we're talking about the totality of existence itself, right? Insofar as the closer that you move to existence, just like the Shaykh Ahmed says in that proposition, existence looks upon its Lord, right? Essence looks upon itself, and the deeper it looks into itself is when it finds existence. So this is also a meaning of knowing thyself. When you know your essence, right? Human beings have modalities of knowing. One modality of knowing is to look outside themselves, to see every object as distinct from another object. The modality of knowing that is essential to human beings is the self-knowledge, which is to turn inward. And once that human being turns inward is when they find the stream of existence itself, that which looks only upon its Lord, the Godhead. And these symbols and these sorts of arguments about how to approach this question become that much more powerful, in my opinion, and empower human beings a lot more to kind of discover both themselves and the world around them, than the kind of answers that we get from contemporary modern philosophy that wants to, just basically place all kinds of categories aside and look at just very simple material causalities as the answer to everything, when very basic issues have not been resolved. But by the same token, the kind of answers that literalist dogma of religion offers don't give us anything either. In fact, they compound the problems even more. So in a sense, right, the issue of free will and destination can then now be imaged and symbolized in our age as the debate between, on the one hand, the radical atheists and the deniers of the spirit, and on the other hand, the literalist fundamentalists, who got at least a very small element of the bigger picture right, but everything else in their application of it is completely off. So we are the people of the middle path, wherein God is the first axiom of everything that we're about. But by the same token, we understand that this axiom, this first axiom, has a causality and a connectivity to everything, and that the closer that we move towards it, the more we share in that divine freedom to act in the world. So let me stop right there. So if you have any questions, and I can then refine some of these points I've made.
Sheikh, that's absolutely beautiful. And I'm just taking it all in as you're sharing this wisdom. And it reminds me of this aspect of what I was reading about the metaverse and how there's different converging timelines depending on the decisions that you make. And since we are basically have the foundations of a Shia tariqah and our philosophy of Shiism, I was reading Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, who says that there are 70,000 different worlds and everyone thinks that they're by their own self. So you have 70,000 different probabilities, like you said, that you could pick A, B, or C, but the divinity already knows what's going to happen, how it's going to happen. So all these different convergences, like they say, with Pluto returning, and now we're living in a time where the last time this happened was when America had its revolution in 1776, which changed the entire world as we know it. So we're living in that same time period where you have these things like the metaverse coming out. Facebook is changing its name to Meta. All these things are implying, even in Hollywood, they're showing you in the movies with characters from different universes coming together. So how does free will and predestination, and also what Imam Jafar al-Sadiq said about these 70,000 different probabilities that we're dealing with at all times?
Well, I mean, there's another hadith from his father, Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam, where, the Imam says, do you think that this is the only world that God has created? God has created thousands of atoms and thousands of worlds with these atoms before, and you are only living in the last amongst them, right? Which basically says exactly what you just said and bolsters that hadith from the sixth Imam, that this is what's going on. So there are parallel universes, but there are also parallel universes in time that move in a trajectory that from our timeline are millions and billions of years simultaneously. So all of these things are happening. And this is where the question of free will, absolute free will, becomes extremely problematic, is that if an agent is in possession of 100% free will, then they can arrest the space-time continuum, because at that point they are God.
Yes.
Right. And this is what I was trying to tell Matt when we had this conversation in Berlin, is that, this is a very problematic position, but by the same token, it's just as problematic as the other side, because the other side is then positing that if there is absolute predetermination, then there is no moral act, there is literally no moral agency. That means that God scripts everything. Now, the matter is between the two. There is a predetermination of causes, right?
Yes.
But then there is an agency in the acts within the confines of a trajectory of causes, right? And to understand this, right, is then in itself becomes the path that one began, because then one begins to see these various causalities, the train of these causalities, what they're doing, the influence that they have, what they mean, what the ecology of all of this is ultimately in the greater scheme of things. So to dismiss one or the other is I think, equally a problem. And this is what the Imams are saying. So the matter is between the two. But what the Shaykh al-Ahmad al-Asai himself then proposes is absolutely beautiful. And he justifies this by quoting other hadith, is that the human beings, the closer that you move to the divine, which means the more that you deepen yourself in your practices, the more you turn inward and introspect into your own self, the more then you are participating, or the more you are awakened to that divine freedom to which you are a part.
Yes. And that's absolutely, that answers my question. And when reading these different teachers and imams that have came and taught this deep esoteric knowledge, another thing that stood out to me, Sheikh, about free will and predestination was when I was looking at the teachings and writings, like whatever is left behind, of Hassan Sabah. And one of his quotes is, "Nothing is true and everything is permitted." How do you define that from free will and predestination, about nothing being true and everything is being permitted?
Well, number one, he never actually said that. This was attributed to him by his enemies. Hassan Sabah actually was not as antinomian as a lot of people think he was, at least based on the historical evidence of the text that have come down to us. But Peter Lamborn Wilson, and before him others, made this a kind of a popular thing in the popular culture.
Got it.
See, if nothing is true and everything is permitted, that means that the universe exists in nothingness, right? And I don't mean that as a cutesy kind of slogan that a lot of these people who latch on to these things say. That means that the space-time continuum is at this very moment, absent and suspended. So then you need to explain at that point, even if this entire, this whole thing is an illusion, you need to explain how it is, not by cutesy and nice sounding slogan, but you need to explain for yourself, not for anybody else, how it is that you're feeling, you're touching, and there's a causality of things around you that you don't have complete control over, at least your senses and your partial mind tell you that you don't have any control over, right? This is these sorts of statements are we have a lot of these in this time, and people who take the crazy wisdom of the East and anything goes, everything is permitted.
That's a good point.
That's yes and no, right? But let's put it to you this way. The way I deconstruct this statement, the way that human beings, human societies, and human institutions, right, have projected the notion of law and normality and normativism is false, because we don't have possession of absolute knowledge about the world around us in order to be able to craft the kind of laws that would govern us properly. If we did, then this world wouldn't have experienced the kind of things that it has for the last several thousand years.
Right.
So in a sense, that statement is true insofar as it is a judgment on the human being's conception of the rules of whether of natural law, of divine law, or even a material law, right? But it is a false statement insofar as no reality exists outside of the confines of certain rules, right?
Thank you for sharing that, because so many people attribute that statement to Hassan Sabah, and and I'm glad that you cleared that up as somebody who is from that tradition, and us being from basically following the Shi'i philosophy and coming from those tariqas. I've seen it all over the place where they attribute this to him. So I'm glad, just like how Rumi is misconstrued in his translations, he's also attributed these false quotes. So thank you for that.
And it's hilarious because it originates with the enemies of the Ismailis at the time. Back then there was a lot of polemic, back and forth. They tried to each enemy tried to discredit the other, and so these were the sorts of things that they attributed to Hassan Sabah. I mean, even in the period of the Qiyamah proclamation of Hassan II, al-Dhikri Salam, there were certain things going on. But the fact is, I had this conversation with someone on Facebook the other day. Absolute esotericism is an impossibility in the world of spatiotemporality for a very simple reason, is because absolute esotericism implies absolute interiority, and absolute interiority cannot have a praxis, right? Because it is beyond the confines of spatiotemporality. But since we are embodied beings, right, in this world, right, that makes it impossible to live. So then what is the truth of the matter? The truth of the matter is as follows, that there is a balance between the esoteric and the exoteric, which is what the imams mean when they say that we are the people of both the esoteric and the exoteric. And in a sense, the exoteric practice is supposed to be the container for the esotericism, right? So the practices that we do, the dhikr, the salat, the fasting, all of this stuff is in essence supposed to be the container of the esoteric reality. This unfortunately gets lost as traditions move further away from their foundations, and it becomes a power game. So the laws, rules, regulations, the science of fiqh and the way that both sides, Sunni and Shia, accumulated complete nonsensical stuff over the centuries on top of this, and mountains, ranges of just complete rubbish that has absolutely nothing to do with the original revelation.
Yes.
But once we start to move back closer and closer to the very foundation of the revelation, beginning with the prophet himself and then his family, we begin to glean the intentions of what these practices are supposed to teach us, what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to ground us in a spiritual path, right? And it's right there in the beginning of the Fatiha when it says, Ihdina Siratal Mustaqim, guide us upon the straight path. Well, the guidance upon the straight path is not merely just certain rote acts, right? You're not trying to appease God. You cannot appease the creator of the universe. You have to appease yourself, but you're following a path towards the understanding and for unification with the reality of the theophanies and the light of that creator, right? So, what difference makes to the all high that whether what foot you enter a bathroom with, which is the kind of stuff that these fuqaha have written endless reams of writings about.
I see that in coming from Pakistan, Sheikh. I see these Deobandis, Barelvis, Takfiris. These people they totally misconstrued everything from the Islamic revelation, what I've seen in Pakistan, where they put Sunni against Shia, they tell you to hate each other, they're saying, oh, this person is kafir, he's this, he's that. But in reality, that's not the original teaching of Islam. So I thank you for clarifying that.
No, it's not the original teaching of Islam. And in fact, you can even apply the same argument to any other tradition, whether we're talking about Christianity, Judaism, or even Hinduism and Buddhism.
Yes.
The founders of these traditions had very simple, but also simultaneously very deep, complex messages, right? And understanding that complexity was in embracing that simplicity. But then as we have moved away from these foundations, they are corrupted, right? And this is why the Bayan posits that there is a necessity for there being a renewal of the revelation from each age because of this tendency of human beings to corrupt the original message. Because as you move away from the foundations of a creed, that the light, as it were, becomes dimmer. So it is a necessity for the light to rejuvenate itself, right? So every time so then the Godhead or the divine sends a new messenger to the world, or a new wali to the world, or a new message to the world in whatever form, in order to rejuvenate that light from age to age to age. And this will happen continuously for all eternity, at least with human beings, so long as we are here, right? And this principle may also apply to other worlds and other universes and parallels, multiverses and what have you in their own context. Because the divine hand is everywhere in everything, and its hand is above their hands, as the verse says. So this is what people need to understand. But these people, the Wahhabis, the Abandis, Taliban, even the mullahs in Iran, including those in Iraq, have gotten it all wrong. And what they have done is that they have, in my opinion, they have constructed for themselves and their followers a wall around which they don't want to let the spirit in. Why? Because I think ultimately these people are deathly afraid of the spirit, right? Because of the power of the spirit is such that that you cannot assume what its will is. It tells you what its will is. So then to assume that if we do this and that, or if we are going to hell if we enter a bathroom with the right foot or left foot, if we enter it first, or if I look at a woman and get lustful thoughts, then I'm going to hell and I've committed adultery, right? rather than to teach people, a balanced way of being, rather than to teach people how to control their own minds in a ecological sort of way, right?
Yes.
Rather than to teach people that, yes, things such as adultery, such as, hurting other people's, breaking your vows, that sort of thing is bad, and then punishing them with the hudud laws that we've had. Rather than doing that is to educate people and to groom people, to bring people up to a certain level of understanding throughout their lives from the time that they're children, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that they're living in a balance, both with ecology, with the horizons and within themselves, right? As the verse says,
Yes.
So what we need is a creed, as it were, that is teaching human beings to understand the nature of the horizon, which is the predetermination, and themselves, which is the free will,
Mm-hmm.
and to have the balanced harmony between the two, which is the divine light, the nur, right? Once we come to that place, or enough people come into that, then we are in a position to then begin to reflect this light out and bring other things, create harmony. The point is to create harmony. We're not trying to create utopia, because the nature of this world of spatio-temporality is such that utopia is an impossibility. It can never be created. And it's not the nature of this world to create utopia, but balance is something else. Balance can indeed be created, but balance can only be created when certain perspectives in the mind of a collective of humanity are properly changed for the better. We don't want to brainwash anybody. We don't want to mold human beings into robots, which is what technology is attempting now to do. We want to bring humans into their organic balance with the metaverse, with all of God's creation, not just the material universe, but the spiritual universes and the myriads of multiverses within those, et cetera, et cetera. A human being that literally lives by and is the embodiment of what the Bible says of man created in the image of God, or what the Hadith said. God created Adam in its own image. That is the kind of civilization that we are seeking, and that is the kind of civilization, if and when it is created, is basically humanity moving back into the Garden of Eden.
That's pretty much it, Sheikh. And thank you so much for this clarification that you've given on these many topics, such as predestination and free will, that so many people misconstrue depending on the upbringing that they've had, depending on culture, religion. But at the end, it all comes back to finding that balance within yourself and everything around you. So it's within yourself. You have to find that balance to see this world that's there doing what it does, but at the same time, we realize that this is a spiritual realm we've been placed in to learn something, to uplift each other, and to learn something in this time that we've been given. Because like you said, it's going to continue on and on and on in this infinite spiral. And we just find ourselves living in these interesting times where there's just so much going on with technology. Everyone has attached themselves to a thinking, a philosophy, the way that they want to do things. But at the end, like you said, in the mind of the Godhead, whether they pick A, B, C, or D, it's already converged in the grand scheme of things, like even what Imam Jafar as-Sadiq has said, which comes to my next question, Sheikh. What do you think of those people, let's say, that I've encountered here in America, who, let's say, are dealing with the left-hand path, or those that are following the Crowley philosophy of do what thou wilt? How does that correlate with free will and predestination in terms of everything you've discussed so far?
I've had extensive discussions with a lot of people. I've read all of their books. There was a time that I took Aleister Crowley himself seriously, but the further I read him, the more I realized the man was not philosophically trained, and that it would have served him a lot better to not just read the Kabbalah as it was received through the Golden Dawn, but if he had known, for example, Arabic, or had a command of Latin to the point that he could read the translations, Latin translations of the works of Avicenna, etc. I think the Thelemic philosophy would have been a lot more refined. As for the left-hand path, and I've said this in a number of places, the left-hand path, as it exists in the West today, is basically an inverted narrative of Christianity.
Yes.
But the original left-hand path that comes from India and also exists in Sufism in its own form is actually the path of the woman. So the left-hand path in India is known as the Vama Marga, right? The Vama Marga means the left path. left hand, or the path of the woman, which refers to what? It refers to the cycle of the moon, the cycle of the woman, or the spiral that occurs in the Kundalini. You have the solar spiral and you have the lunar spiral. The Vama Marga refers to the lunar spiral of the Kundalini. That is the path. Now, how this manifested in the form of movements in Tantra, predominantly those who are known as the Kali worshipper, or those who are even older than the Shaktas, or those who believe that the Godhead was the goddess, referred to the All High as the Mahashakti. Those are the original left-hand path, right? So, and it wasn't any of this, kind of malevolence or maleficity or relishing in these Judeo-Christian narratives of hell that was at issue. Yes, the Kali Tantrikas, they emphasize the certain aspects of Kali that, at least to the sensibilities of most Brahmins, it's quite malevolent. But once one begins to look deeper into the reality of who Kali is, Kali, first of all, is time. So Kala in Sanskrit means time, and its embodiment in the woman, right, has both a fierce aspect as well as a compassionate aspect. So the mother amongst the Tantrikas is both fierce and loving. It is loving to its children, and it's fierce to the enemies of its children, right? And once that anger of that goddess is ignited, God help whoever stands in her way, right? But these are archetypes, these are symbols that the Tantrikas are trying to convey. So this is the way that the original left-hand path has to be taken. We are left-hand path because we look upon the All High as a feminine force. So we are coming out of that trajectory ourselves. But we don't subscribe to the Judeo-Christian narrative, or actually, it is actually a Christian, Western Christian narrative of God and the devil, because from our point of view, Satan is basically the ape of God, right? And
yes,
is as simple as that. And it is not even an angel from the Shia point of view, although there's a debate between Sunni and Shia about the nature of Iblis, whether it was an angel or a jinn. In the Shia sources, we are pretty confident that Iblis was a jinn and not an angel.
yes.
Because angels don't have free will. And as I explained the other day in a podcast I did with this gentleman here in Australia, angels are basically, in the Islamic concept, they are extensions of the light of God. So we don't, it's incorrect to refer to angels as individuals. We should rather more correctly refer them to as angelophanies, right? Appearances of angels, which are basically the appearance of light, as it were. So the left-hand path perspective that you find in the West, this celebration of the devil, and this is from, whether you're talking from the point of view of the original Indian left-hand path, or whether we're talking from the Islamic perspective, to us, this perspective makes no sense whatsoever. And it's basically inverting. See, these people they have been hurt and abused by the realities of the church, right?
Yes, yes.
But rather than to interrogate what this is all about, they then fall into the fallacy of reversing the narrative of what the church teaches, right? And then latching onto that as the kind of the apotheosis of their own path. That is their revolt. But this is a very petulant approach to a question of rebellion, let alone the divine. It's like a kid whose parents tell him not to do such and such, and just to spite his parents, and goes ahead and does it. The satanic left-hand path of the West is very much like this. And that is why I don't take most of these people seriously. Now, with Aleister Crowley, a lot of his works are interesting. My problem with Crowley is I believe that there are certain philosophical gaps in his thinking. He didn't really think through certain positions to the end. The controversies that he was involved with, and particularly the fact that he is known to have been a pedophile, is a real problem, not to mention that he was a spy for the British during the war. Now, we don't necessarily have to take this against his spiritual and magical inclinations, but I would rather delve into Al-Buni than Aleister Crowley. And I have read all of Aleister Crowley's works. That doesn't mean that the man doesn't have value. Everything has value in its own context. And those who are interested in the occult in general should do well to at least inform themselves of what Aleister Crowley is about. But to the premise that says that what thou wilt will be the whole of the law, is if we take this as a literal statement, although Aleister Crowley himself didn't take it literally, if we take this as a literal statement, which many, at least the younger Thelemites do, then what happens is that we misunderstand the nature of causality.
Mm-hmm.
Because we cannot do what we want at all times, right?
Yes.
Because we have to also consider the causalities and the agents that are around us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Aleister Crowley, to his credit, actually explained this, and he says that do what thou wilt shall be. The whole of the law does not mean that you go out and do whatever you want or do whatever you want to another person. But nevertheless, even when these things are phrased in such a way and the influence that they have on the popular culture, they seep into the minds and then the actions of people. So, and then they have a deleterious effect on the culture as a whole, as we have seen since the end of the 60s. The folks during the 1960s had the best intentions, and their intentions were good, but the application of what they did went awry, and instead of having a revolution, at the end of that, we ended up having a global counter-revolution. And the establishments got stronger and more entrenched in the power than they were before what happened in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
That's why, as I believe there's another kind of wave very similar to what the 60s produced is coming. This time around, humanity needs to be a lot more smarter and not just latch on to cutesy slogans without thinking through the implications of what these slogans imply. That doesn't mean that human beings don't have freedom. Human beings have freedom. Human beings have agency, as we just discussed in what free will and predestination is. But the faculty and the ability to choose wisely and accurately and with deliberation
Mm-hmm.
is something that human beings also need to take on board. That every action that you take, right, you have to also think through the implications of what that actions are going to have, not just upon yourself, but also on other people around you, and also wider into time. How, if I make X, Y, or Z decision impulsively, what impact it will have for my children, their children, and so on and so forth. Because so far, humanity has been living for a couple of thousand years now by making decisions on such circumscribed basis, whether it be on impulse or on limited information. And then these decisions are made. And then not only are the decision makers themselves disenfranchised at some point in the future, but everyone around them and also their progeny are negatively impacted into the future. Yes. So human beings need to start thinking in that context. They need to think of what if I do X, Y, and Z, how is this going to impact other people, right? And that becomes in itself an act of free will, and it is an act of free will from the name Ar-Rahman, because the All High, every command that issues from the All High, right? The All High is looking after the best interests of its creation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the All High considers everything. Every factor is one with it at one. So that command that issues forward is for the benefit of everyone. And this is why we say to have faith in the Spirit,
Mm-hmm.
is because the Spirit is in possession of all information and knowledge of past, present, and future as an already always singular moment. Right? Now, if human beings strove to raise themselves to that paradigm themselves,
Mm-hmm.
then their decision-making processes would be much better and much more wider in scope, right? So, for example, I mean, I've been watching a couple of different of these great American series, one of which was the one that I forget its name, but I watched it, I binge watched it over a couple of weeks. And this gentleman, the protagonist, was originally a chemist, right?
Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad. And this series was just amazing. The writing, everything in this thing was just absolutely fantastic. I don't know why I didn't sit down and watch this thing until recently.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that I really gleaned in this, if we take this, is that an infinitely not wise, but knowledgeable individual who was a genius, literal genius, could make such bad decisions over a course of a lifetime based on his own impulsiveness. For example, all of the problems that led him to the point of being nearly at the point of penury was because he was impulsive, because he felt slighted by his ex-girlfriend's family, because he came from a very modest background, whereas she came from a very well-to-do, family. And because he couldn't control his own nafs on the issue, right?
Yes.
Rather than looking long-term into the picture, he not only left his girlfriend, he left that company that then the girlfriend and the friend turned into a mega billion-dollar corporation, right, with influence all throughout the world, which was originally actually his brainchild.
Yes.
So that is the thing, and this Breaking Bad is very symptomatic of what I'm talking about. And it doesn't matter how educated and how brilliant you are. If you cannot control yourself, if you cannot control your own impulsiveness, right, in a given matter, then you can have 1,000 PhDs, but you will be in exactly the same position as Walt will be. And at the end, you will lose your family, you will lose your life, you will unleash mayhem, as he did, right, all around you, which at the end of the day, there's not only blame on yourself, but you have sown corruption on the earth, what the Quran says. You have become a mufsid fil ard, no matter what your intentions have been at the beginning, but because you haven't been able to control that thing. And that is also a meaning of moving into the divine freedom, because the more that you move into the divine freedom in your practice, the more control you have over these things, right? Just as the verse says, as we move from the nafs al-amara bil-su, the soul inclining to evil, then we move into the nafs al-lawama, the soul that blames itself. Then the nafs al-mutma'ina, nafs al-raziyah, marziyah, right? This is what the meaning is. It's all the same nafs. Nafs also meaning soul in Arabic, as well as ego. So the ego, as it flowers into its solarity, right? As the ego becomes its own soul, as it flowers like a plant into itself.
Sheikh, I thank you so much for sharing this, because looking into Sufism with the time that I have, and also being with you as my murshid and Shaykh, the main thing that I've studied and understood and respected about the Sufi path is your ego must submit to a guide or a Shaykh that will be there to guide you and mentor you and give you the advice that you need, because sometimes we don't have all the answers. And in the Western world, everyone is trapped in this bubble of ego that I know everything. I have the answers to everything. I don't want to hear what you have to say. And you don't create harmony that way. And in the Sufi path and the Bayani path, and whichever way you perceive that divinity and reality, you must realize that, okay, you know what, at the end, I might have a degree or I might be with an organization, but at the end, I don't have all the answers to life. I'm still trying to discover the aspect of know thyself and know the world around me. So that is very important. What you have stated is you have to circumscribe your desires and live your life within due bounds, and just live within moderation.
And let's look at this story, another story in the Quran, right? When God tells Iblis to bow to Adam, look at it from this angle.
Yes.
Iblis at that point knew a lot more than the creation of God, because he'd been around a lot longer than the creation of God, which is Adam, right? And God told him bow, and he said, I'm not going to do it. And this is also, a parable and a reflection of the modern human who thinks it knows everything, right? If you know everything, then why is it that your world is plagued by mental illness, by crime, by disunity? Your families are ripped apart.
Yes.
Nobody talks to each other. Everybody hates each other. You are breaking your back, busting your backside day in, day out in a corporate dystopia to no end. You're in a rat wheel. So how do you know everything? How can you know everything?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Sheikh. And that comes to my next question. In terms of everything that you have shared so far, how do you see right now with these astrological changes taking place with Pluto and the world being in that same phase that it was when America was being conceived as a new country? What advice would you give humanity, and what predictions do you have, let's say, the next year or 2 years, with the aspect of where humanity has to make a choice between free will and predestiny in terms of getting its act together on how even Mother Nature is rebelling against humanity with the Tonga, and us destroying the world, destroying each other. So even the natural elementals are rebelling against humanity because we have not been good caretakers of each other and the world around us. So I would love your thoughts on how free will and predestiny will determine this balance and this great astrological change that we're in?
We have a choice. We either shape up or it will ship us out. It's really as simple as that. And if we don't shape up, then humanity has a use-by date, and that use-by date is nearing. And within the next 100 years, there could be an extinction event. In fact, the scientists are basically predicting that it's going to happen much sooner.
Yes.
And this is why the elements are rebelling, is because the majority of the human race, or at least those who are in control of it and are guiding or misguiding the majority of the human race, are still not putting a foot to the brakes, as it were, right? I find it profoundly suspicious that right as we're coming out of this whole COVID thing, which I think is going to be around kind of lingering for another year, all of a sudden this whole thing with Ukraine and Russia and everything explodes, and now there's talk of war, on continental Europe. It's as if this is scripted. They need this, in order to, probably, make back the shortfalls that they had during the COVID pandemic. But this kind of stupidity that has been with humanity for a long time, and to which the elites of this planet, the bankers and the ruling classes, are continually propelling humanity. This is not getting us anywhere. Human beings have the power. If enough free wills from that divine agency were to be switched on this planet, that consensus would shatter. These people would have no power. If the soldiers threw down their guns, if the people refused to comply with the orders of these elites, and if there was a mass event like that, we could turn this place around tomorrow. And we could stop this extinction event that the scientists are warning is coming if we're not careful. A complete ecological failure, the system will fail, and with it, we'll go to human race. Now, whatever the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezos think, with their money and the technology that they think that they have at their disposal, I don't care how advanced you think your technology is, or what you may not have even disclosed to humanity, but there is no way that you're going to escape this event to another star system.
Sure.
We don't have that technology yet. We may have it in a couple hundred years, or maybe in 100 years, but we don't have it right now. So is it not even in the best interests of these massive plutocrats, whose faces we see day in and day out on the media, to at least have a conscience and tell their other peers to stop, to put the brakes on the wheel? But they're not going to do it.
Yes. And that's basically them. What I see with the way that their rockets are shaped like phallic symbols, they're basically giving this finger to humanity that, what?
Yes.
It's symbolically that we are screwing you over, in that metaphorical sense, with the way their rockets are shaped and how we are in control. And even in Hollywood, they show this post-apocalyptic movie, Sheikh. I know you've probably seen it. It's called Elysium, where these people elite live on a different system, and they have hotels and everything. And while the people here are suffering as serfs and I've read books like that even in high school, where there would be like this robotic future, and humanity was just being used as cattle. That's exactly what it comes down to.
That's what they want. And this is what they want for the human race. They want to create a dystopia like that, where we're all slaves to their whims. But that's not going to happen. The fact is that they're not Ubermensch, as much as they may think in their mind that they may be.
Right.
And they're subject to the same things that we are. And like I said, our technology is still not at that level where if there is an extinction event, where human beings, even like them, can survive it, or to get up and go somewhere else. We don't have that yet. This is our home, so we have a responsibility to take care of it, and we need to clean it up.
Thank you, Sheikh. Thank you so much. And this has been so beautiful and enlightening for me, and I hope whoever is listening, it has been benefited you in some way as well. As we always love the teachings of Sheikh Wahid Azal and the love and presence he provides for us in our life. So, Sheikh, any closing thoughts on free will and predestination?
No, just everybody get into yourselves, get further into yourself. Find your freedom within your own self, which is God.
Thank you.
Find God, and then you find freedom.
Thank you, Sheikh. Love and light for everyone, and Nur alaikum.
Alaikum nur.